I want you to just take a second and imagine this very specific, like incredibly exhausting moment.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this.
Right. You know the one. You wake up, you open your eyes, and before your feet even have the chance to touch the bedroom floor, it just hits you.
Yep.
The crushing weight of the day's to-do list, the unread emails, the ambient existential dread, it all just drops right onto your chest like an anvil.
That's awful.
It really is. Your brain completely skips the graceful awakening sequence and just goes straight into overdrive. Well, today we are looking at a collection of modern poetry that's specifically designed to act as an antidote to that exact feeling.
It's a very necessary antidote, honestly.
Totally. So, welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to cut through all that relentless external noise of the modern world and really navigate the internal landscape of the human experience.
And we have some incredible source material for this.
We do. We're going to be guided by 3 lyrical transcripts from the YouTube channel BIRDY Music. And I want to stress, these aren't just song lyrics. They're this collection of modern poetry spanning from, gentle grounding affirmations all the way to really intense verses about trauma and survival.
Yeah, the sheer emotional architecture across these 3 pieces is just fascinating. We really aren't looking at simple pop lyrics here.
Not at all.
I mean, we are examining text fundamentally designed to be processed by the nervous system rather than just logically sorted by the brain.
Which is a huge distinction.
Exactly. They span the entire spectrum of what it takes to survive a highly demanding environment, taking you from those ambient grounding phrases to, like you said, intensely visceral verses about severe trauma, panic, and ultimately resilience.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really appreciate the journey these pieces take us on, we have to look at the massive emotional contrast between them. It's essentially a masterclass in understanding our own psychological rhythms. And to even begin mapping those rhythms, well, we have to start right at the beginning of the day.
Trapped under that anvil on the chest.
Exactly, trapped under the anvil. And that brings us to the first track, which is titled Breathe into the Day.
And you notice immediately that the lyrics in this first piece are, well, they're incredibly sparse.
Yeah, barely any words at all.
Right, it relies mostly on these ethereal soundscapes, just dropping in this one piercingly clear phrase, washing over the heavy thought.
Washing over the heavy thought.
Mathematically throwing a dense, complex wall of lyrics at a brain that just woke up would trigger the exact cognitive overload the piece is trying to prevent.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Psychologically, that sparse architecture is engineered to establish a baseline of presence by utilizing what we call a liminal space.
A liminal space, so like the waiting area in your brain.
Yeah, exactly like a waiting area.
That highly vulnerable threshold where you've left sleep behind, but you haven't fully booted up the conscious operating system yet.
And when you force that transition too quickly, your biology actually turns against you.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, we experience a natural biological phenomenon called the cortisol awakening response.
Yeah.
It's basically a spike in stress hormones naturally designed to get us out of bed.
Okay, so a little stress is normal to wake up.
Right. But if you immediately compound that by inviting in the complex demands of the modern world, say checking the global news cycle or your work emails while you're still lying in bed, your brain interprets that data through a very primitive lens.
Because our human amygdala hasn't really had time to evolve past the Stone Age, right?
Not even close.
It doesn't know what an urgent spreadsheet is or a passive-aggressive Slack message. It just registers a sudden high-stakes alert. It's like grabbing your phone to check emails before you've even had a sip of coffee is basically tricking your nervous system into thinking you were being actively chased by a bear for the rest of the day.
That is the perfect analogy.
You are literally inviting raw cognitive clutter and survival mechanics in for breakfast.
And the evolutionary mismatch there is just jarring. We are applying ancient threat detection hardware to digital annoyances.
Which is exhausting.
It is. And that mechanism is exactly why washing over the heavy thought operates as such a vital directive. The lyric doesn't instruct you to actively fight the mental static.
It doesn't say analyze the static.
Right. It doesn't ask you to analyze your morning dread or categorize your to-do list or sort through the cognitive clutter.
Because doing any of that would engage the brain's executive functioning.
And invite the bear inside.
Oh, wow. Yeah, leave the bear outside.
Instead, it acts as a protective sonic barrier. It's intentionally delaying the cognitive boot sequence to preserve that fragile liminal threshold for just a few moments longer.
So you're letting the peace wash over the dread, creating the sort of buffer zone before you step out the door. But, I mean, stepping out the door is inevitable. You eventually do have to leave that fragile morning sanctuary and hit the sheer grinding machinery of the modern world,
Unfortunately, yeah.
which introduces a completely different kind of exhaustion. And that is really captured in the lyrics of the second piece we're looking at called Chaos to Cycle.
The critique of modern productivity in this piece is incredibly stark.
It really doesn't hold back.
No, the text states, the world demands a constant home, a rhythmic output, never done.
A rhythmic output never done.
We live in a sociological framework that measures almost all human worth by daily, quantifiable output. I mean, think about it. We monetize our hobbies into side hustles.
Oh, totally.
We track our REM sleep just to optimize our waking performance, and we are constantly trying to biohack our own chemistry just to produce more capital.
It's like we treat ourselves like malfunctioning assembly lines.
Exactly.
But, I do want to push back on this just a little bit, just to explore the reality of that demand.
Sure, go ahead.
Because a rhythmic output isn't just an abstract capitalist concept. It's essentially the baseline requirement for how our society functions, right?
It is the reality we live in, yeah.
Like, we all have rent to pay, we have groceries to buy, we have dependents who rely on our income. And the track offers this radical directive to arrive in the space where you don't have to produce.
Right.
Isn't telling people to just step away from producing a bit overly idealistic or even impossible? For most people, stepping off the assembly line isn't a spiritual choice. It means losing their livelihood.
And framing that exact tension is what makes the track so subversive.
How so?
Well, the piece specifically titles itself as neuroaffirming.
Okay.
That single psychological concept shifts the narrative entirely away from the traditional medical model.
The model that views different brain functions as broken.
Exactly. The medical model views variations in human brain function, like ADHD, autism, or sensory processing differences, as defective machines that need to be fixed. But this moves toward a neurodiversity model.
I see.
The track introduces the concept of having jagged edges.
Jagged edges, representing the severe friction you feel when you try to force a non-standard brain into a very rigid neurotypical mold of constant rhythmic productivity.
Yes. And when the lyrics declare, it's not a defect,
Yeah.
it's your spirit-finding voice, it's making a really profound argument about the nature of that friction.
So the friction isn't a failure.
No. Your inability to maintain that relentless mechanized output isn't a personal failure or a sign of laziness. It is your biology actively rebelling against an incredibly unnatural way of living.
Wow.
And trying to suppress that rebellion, well, it comes at a massive cost.
Right, because society basically demands that if your edges are jagged, you have to sand them down.
You have to wear armor.
Yeah, you have to build up this persona to mask your true self just so you can appear normal and productive in a standard office environment or a social setting.
It's exhausting.
It really makes you think of running a software emulator.
Oh, how do you mean?
Well, if you have a Mac, right, but you desperately need to run a program that only works on Windows, you have to run an emulator in the background.
Right.
And it takes massive amounts of RAM and drains the battery twice as fast just to translate the code in real time so the program doesn't crash.
That is exactly what masking is like.
Mm.
The metabolic toll of that translation is astronomical.
It just drains you.
Carrying that mask requires an immense, largely invisible amount of psychological energy. I mean, if you were spending 70% of your internal battery simply running the emulator to survive the sensory overload of a workplace,
Or navigating unspoken social expectations.
right, then you have absolutely no energy left for basic survival, let alone experiencing actual joy.
You're literally overheating your own hardware just to look like everyone else's screen.
Exactly.
But dropping the emulator to survive the outside world leaves you entirely exposed to an even bigger threat.
Which brings us to the next piece.
Because when the external demands finally stop and the exhaustion sets in, the internal storm takes over. And that vulnerability plunges us straight into the heaviest, most visceral track in the collection, which is Chest Full of Thunder.
The pivot here from external societal critique to internal physiological reality is just staggering.
It really hits you.
We are looking at the mechanics of severe anxiety and trauma here. Now, anyone who has navigated panic understands that anxiety isn't just a nervous thought.
It's so much more than that.
It is a full-body biological event driven by the HPA axis, the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands, literally dumping adrenaline into your bloodstream.
And the author captures that biology so beautifully. They write about pressure on my ribs like trauma's trying to draw blood and waking up in a body that won't let me breathe.
It's very vivid.
It is. And what really strikes me here isn't just the physical weight of the panic, but the profound, suffocating isolation of it.
The isolation is often the worst part.
Like, the lyrics mention people standing in the shadows offering these well-meaning platitudes, telling the narrator to just let go.
The disconnect between the internal reality and the external perception is the true tragedy of the experience.
Because they just don't get it.
The people in the shadows mean well, but they are witnessing a person sitting perfectly still, entirely unaware that a Category 5 hurricane is actively tearing through that person's ribcage.
Yeah.
You can't simply let go of a physiological flash flood happening in your own lungs.
Wait, I just realized something about the way that impossibility is written.
What's that?
Look at the specific rhyme scheme the author uses here. Mythical, fictional, biblical, cynical.
Oh, the rapid fire section.
Yes. If you actually read that sequence out loud, the rapid accelerating rhythm of those specific multisyllable words forces you to take these shallow, frantic breaths.
Oh, wow, you're right.
The phonetic structure of the poem perfectly mimics the suffocating downward spiral of a panic attack. You literally run out of air just trying to keep up with the cadence.
That is brilliant. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, there is a specific metaphor buried in this track that explains the exact mechanism behind why that panic feels so deeply inescapable.
Okay, what is it?
The author compares trauma to a sermon. They write, trauma like a sermon that my body's never done.
Trauma like a sermon. Wow. That implies a captive audience and a preacher delivering absolute truth.
Exactly. The concept of nervous system indoctrination is vividly illustrated here.
Indoctrination.
Yeah, because culturally, we tend to view trauma as a passive memory, like a static recording of a bad event from the past that occasionally replays.
Right, like a good old movie.
But biologically, it is an active, aggressive process. Your body is essentially sitting in the pews of a church, being actively preached to by its own internal threat response system.
So the brain is brainwashing the body.
Yeah.
It's like trying to deprogram someone who has spent decades in a cult. You can't just walk up to them and say, hey, the outside world is actually perfectly safe, just let go.
They wouldn't believe you.
No, because they have been fundamentally rewired through relentless repetition to believe the danger is an absolute present tense truth. The preacher at the pulpit of their nervous system is screaming that the threat is happening right now.
And when that doctrine is preached loud enough, for long enough, the nervous system eventually accepts the state of panic as its default baseline.
Oh.
You are fully indoctrinated into hypervigilance.
Being trapped inside that internal storm, constantly listening to that terrifying sermon while trying to run an emulator just to pay your bills, it forces an incredibly difficult question.
It really does.
When the pressure reaches that critical mass, when your own hardware is actively turning against you, what does survival actually look like?
Well, the final thematic arc of this collection completely redefines our cultural understanding of resilience.
Okay.
It strips away the polished, Instagram filter version of healing and explores the messy, contradictory duality of breaking and surviving simultaneously.
The lyrics offer this incredibly honest depiction. They declare, I'm shatterproof, but I'm trembling on the edges, holding myself up by emotional stitches.
We have this deeply ingrained cultural myth that strength looks like an impenetrable stone wall.
Like nothing can hurt you.
Right. We assume that being resilient means you are entirely stoic, unaffected by the pain, and perfectly composed.
But the narrator is openly admitting, no, I am visibly trembling. The structural integrity is compromised. I am literally being held together by surgical thread right now.
And yet, even in that highly fragile state, they introduce this massive climactic image, breathing fire from a collapsing throne and finding a phoenix in the bruise.
A phoenix in the bruise.
Let's really look at the mechanics of that imagery, finding a phoenix in the bruise.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think about the traditional cliche of the phoenix rising from the ashes.
Sure, we all know that one.
What do ashes actually imply? They imply total catastrophic destruction, a clean slate. Ashes mean your past self was burned entirely to the ground, reduced to nothing, and a brand new, flawless bird magically emerged from the dust. But a bruise is a completely different biological mechanism.
Oh, a bruise implies living damaged tissue.
Exactly. You took a massive blunt force hit. It damaged the capillaries. It left a highly visible, ugly purple mark that is incredibly sensitive to the touch.
Yeah,
But the tissue itself is fundamentally alive. The discoloration is actually the visual evidence of white blood cells rushing to the site of the trauma to repair it.
that's a great point.
The rebirth isn't happening in the aftermath of your destruction. The rebirth is actively happening right there in the messy, painful site of the living injury.
The metaphor is spectacular because it validates the ongoing process.
Yeah.
It builds perfectly into the lyrics that follow, where the narrator declares they are still breaking, still fighting, still rising.
So we're breaking.
That progression dispels the deeply toxic cultural narrative that you must be 100% healed before you can move forward or find love or contribute to the world.
So you don't have to wait in purgatory for the stitches to dissolve before you are allowed to start living again.
Exactly. The piece actively champions the paradox that you can be actively breaking down and actively rising up at the exact same time.
It's both.
The trauma even begins to act as a strange kind of accelerant. The narrator sings, "This pain in my chest tries to keep me weak, but I burn even brighter when I can't breathe."
Wow.
And I want to pause here and ask you, the listener, directly. What stands out to you when you hear that? How does it change the way you view your own pain? To realize that the site of the injury itself might contain the exact biological blueprint for your resilience.
It's an incredibly defiant realization. The very lack of oxygen trying to suffocate you becomes the fuel for the fire you breathe from a throne that is actively falling apart beneath you.
Reframing our relationship with our own struggles in this way fundamentally alters how we navigate the world.
So what does this all mean for us today?
Well, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. If we pull back and look at the whole arc we've traveled, we exist in an era where we are constantly bombarded with external information overload. We track the stock market, we refresh the news feeds, we consume endless data about the outside world.
Right.
But perhaps the most vital, life-saving knowledge you can acquire is the mastery of your own internal landscape.
And that mastery starts with the smallest decisions. It means actively protecting that fragile, liminal space in the morning.
Keeping the bear outside.
Yes, refusing to let the evolutionary bear into your cognitive house before you've even had breakfast.
It means acknowledging that your jagged edges are not a failure of character. They are the natural physical friction of a human spirit trying to survive a mechanized world.
Absolutely.
Learning to turn off that exhausting internal emulator and put down the heavy mask isn't a sign of weakness. It is a radical, necessary act of self-preservation.
It really is.
And when you inevitably face the darkest sermons in your own chest, you have to recognize that you carry a living, breathing resilience right there in your bruises.
It is a profound, lifelong journey of self-acceptance.
Yeah.
But before we conclude, this raises an important question.
Okay, lay it on me.
There is one final haunting lyric from Chestful of Thunder that we deliberately saved for the very end, because it completely challenges how modern society tells us to achieve that self-acceptance.
The lyric that flips the entire self-help industry on its head.
Exactly. The author writes, "Introspection's a knife that I carry on my spine. It cuts me open just to check if I'm alive."
It cuts me open just to check if I'm alive. Man, the imagery is brutally sharp.
We live in a therapeutic culture that endlessly commodifies trauma processing. We are constantly instructed to dig into our pasts, to hyperanalyze our childhoods, to dissect every single negative emotion, and to journal about our darkest moments until we uncover some hidden truth.
We're obsessed with it.
We are. Introspection is sold to us as the ultimate, unquestionable cure-all for the human condition.
But if introspection is actually a blade, if we are constantly using it to cut ourselves open, just to feel something sharp, just to make absolutely sure the pain is still there, are we actively preventing our own emotional stitches from holding?
That is the exact challenge I want to leave you with today.
It's a big one.
We spend so much time dissecting the mental static, trying to trace the exact origin of the storm, trying to argue with the preacher in our nervous system.
Yeah.
But what if true healing isn't found in endlessly analyzing the mechanics of your pain? What if the ultimate act of resilience is finally having the courage to put the knife down, step away from the mirror, and simply stop checking the wound?
That's incredibly powerful. Maybe you don't need to perform surgery on yourself every single day just to prove you're alive. You woke up today.
Yep.
You felt the unbearable weight of that anvil on your chest before your feet even hit the floor, and you got up anyway. That alone proves you are alive. You are still breathing fire, even if the throne is collapsing.
You are trembling on the edges, but you are shatterproof.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the human internal landscape. We hope this conversation gives you permission to soften your jagged edges today. Put down the emulator, protect your morning peace, and let your emotional stitches do their job. We'll catch you next time.